Gandalf. That's what they're going to call me, isn't it?
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power Season 2, Episode 8 finale video. There are a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references to the books, some big reveals too, like they finally revealed who the stranger really is. Bit of a big surprise I was not expecting. There are a couple clear setups for the wars between the Elves and Sauron from the books, so we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes. Careful for spoilers if you haven't seen the episode yet, just starting at the beginning, work our way through shot by shot, talk about Easter eggs, WTF moments, starting with the episode title, Shadow in Flame, a reference to the Balrog of Khazad-dûm, also called Durin's Bane, because in this episode, we actually see Durin III sacrifice himself to stop the Balrog, or at least slow him down. There was no way that Durin III was going to be able to stop him, even with a Mithril axe, without his Ring of Power. Even if he was wearing his Ring of Power, he probably still wouldn't have been able to fully stop the Balrog. During the books and Fellowship, Gandalf, now revealed as the stranger during the episode, talks to the others from the Fellowship, saying, "You fear to go into those mines. The dwarves delved too greedily and too deep. You know what they awoke in the darkness of Khazad-dûm, shadow and flame." Part of the whole reason why Sauron gave them their Ring of Power, gave the dwarves the Ring of Power, was so that he could control them. Didn't exactly work out the way Sauron planned it, but it did make the dwarves greedy enough to wake the Balrog to roust him. Durin III uses the power of the ring, influenced by Sauron, to continue mining at the beginning of the episode, rousting the Balrog. On the other side of the wall, they find massive veins of Mithril. And when Durin IV says it's not their mountain, talking about the possessiveness of Durin III, like, look at the riches of our mountain, it's meant to be a callback to what Tom Bombadil said about nobody owning the earth, like the earth belongs to itself. But it is party time because the Balrog shows up. There are a couple of trademark moves of his and weapons that we see during Fellowship of the Ring. He uses his whip and his flaming sword against Durin III, who finally comes to his senses, takes the Ring of Power off, leaves it to Durin IV, and then sacrifices himself to slow the Balrog down. So R.I.P., the king is dead, long live the king. And this is just the beginning for Khazad-dûm. The way the showrunners talked about it, the situation with the Balrog, at least on the show, because the show is changing a lot of the pre-existing book canon and a lot of the stuff that we saw during the movies, trying to sort of connect with the movies, but reinterpreting a lot of stuff from the books, especially the timeline of when things happen. They said the situation with the Balrog going forward after this is evolving. Like, eventually he will lay siege to all of Khazad-dûm, but not till much, much later in the timeline. In the books, that wasn't till like the Third Age. I'm expecting them to speed that up on the show, so we might start to see that towards the end of whatever the final season is, but we will continue to see the Balrog messing with Khazad-dûm throughout the next couple of seasons. The reason why you see the explosion of the Balrog's flaming sword with Durin III's axe is because the axe was made of Mithril. The Mithril is meant to contain some remnants of one of the Silmarils. So part of the idea is that his axe isn't fully strong enough to completely destroy the Balrog's sword, but it is enough to stop him briefly. But if it wasn't clear, even if he had the Ring of Power on his hand, he still wouldn't have been able to kill the Balrog. The Balrog is another Maiar, just like Gandalf, for instance, so during Fellowship, where you see Gandalf sacrifice himself and then continue to fight the Balrog through the beginning of Two Towers to explain how he became Gandalf the White, he had to sacrifice his life. Like, Gandalf, as powerful as he was, basically died trying to stop the Balrog, destroy its body. Interestingly enough, the same thing that happened to Gandalf actually happened to the Balrog too when he destroyed its body. Both of their spirits were immortal, it was just that Iluvitar basically put Gandalf back in another physical body. There's actually a couple references to this phenomenon when Celebrimbor is talking about what's going to happen to him after he finally dies in the episode, so we'll get to that in a second. But I know a lot of the talk after the episode is going to be on the Gandalf of it all. Yes, it is a huge change from the books. I think the reason why they're using his character this way is because they want the name recognition from casual fans. Most people probably will not care who the other blue wizard is if he was a blue wizard, which is what I expected them to do, saying that the other dark wizard was another blue wizard, just because what they were doing with the characters during the season is similar to what the blue wizards were doing in the books. After the episode was released, they made the big Gandalf reveal. There were people that claimed that Tolkien, at the end of his life, thought about retconning his own story again for the wizards and having them show up earlier in the timeline and fight during the Second Age in the wars between the elves and Sauron. So I think this is the show using that as justification for making bigger changes to what we know about the wizards' story, the Istari's story. So I actually now kind of think that the Dark Wizard is a version of Saruman, and they've changed that storyline. The interesting thing, though, is that even though they give Gandalf his name during this episode, they do not name the Dark Wizard. He's still just known as the Dark Wizard, and he talks about himself as being one of the other Istari, one of the 5. So I guess it is still possible he could be one of the Blue Wizards from the canon, because one of the Blue Wizards did start creating cults in the East, and that's basically what the Dark Wizard has done. But a lot of people were just expecting them to go for Saruman, because everybody knows who Saruman is, so that's what the show wants to do. My assumption, based on the dialogue that the Dark Wizard has, talking to Gandalf, saying old friend, talking about how they used to be as kin, heavily implies that it will wind up being Saruman, though. You guys can let me know in the comments, do you think they're just going to change things and say that this is Saruman? But we pick up with their story early in the episode, and the Dark Wizard was waiting for Gandalf, saying for ages, the Valar Manwë told him that Gandalf would come eventually, who he calls old friend, like I said. The idea is that the Istari are meant to be another group of Maiar, just like Sauron is a Maiar from a different group. Same thing with the Balrogs, they're just another form of Maiar. Manwë is part of the Valar, the higher choir of angels, the more powerful ones. He tells Gandalf their history, saying that it was he who convinced him to travel east from Valinor, where they came from, because none of them could hope to defeat Sauron alone. Then he tries to trick Gandalf into joining him in their bid for power to first help Sauron, then overthrow Sauron, essentially. That's the idea, is that eventually we might succeed Sauron. Also betraying the Runish Galdrim soldiers that he'd been using this whole time. Part of the idea, too, is it sounded like he blighted their skin to force them to help, like, if you help me, I will fix you. And that might be why they're wearing those masks. Notice Brank also says that his people were once kings, makes you think of the 9 rings for men. It's meant to foreshadow season 3 probably, when one of them will eventually get a ring. We know the name of one of the 9 was Camul from Rune, so we'll probably meet him during season 3. But it sounds like it's not going to be Brank, because the Dark Wizard kills him, R.I.P. They have a very quick, full-on wizard battle with the Dark Wizard, making it sound like this extreme actions are necessary to defeat Sauron, raising a bunch of rocks like he's going to destroy all the halflings. He's meant to give you the same vibes of Sauron doing all the victim blaming this season with Celebrimbor, and he did the same thing with Galadriel, like trying to justify his terrible actions. I'm trying to help everyone. You're the ones that are making me hurt you because you're not helping me. But really, Sauron just wanted to control everyone, control the world, finger puppet everyone using the Rings of Power. And essentially the Dark Wizard, if he really is Saruman, would do the same thing if he were to come to power. Back at Numenor, Pharazôn believes that Miriel was in league with Sauron and that it was through his power that she was able to survive the sea beast. This is probably a result of his visions in the Palantir. We know that he saw visions of Mount Doom and other things that were happening in Middle-earth. Presumably, he saw what Sauron was doing this season and previous season. And since he's so unhinged right now and anti-Valar, his mind just automatically assumes, seeing all these visions of Sauron and knowing that the Palantir belonged to Miriel, that she must have been in league with him. So the idea is that he's trying to close ranks on Numenor and get rid of any faithful, any connection to the Valar or the Maiar. Basically giving you vibes of Denethor from The Lord of the Rings, spent all of his time staring into the Palantir, saw everything that was going on with Frodo, the Fellowship, but also misread his visions and assumed that they all meant to do evil. Thus, Pharazôn basically makes it illegal to be a member of the faithful on Numenor and starts rounding everyone up. The other side effect of this act is to basically give the faithful more of a reason to bail on Numenor and go back to Middle-earth, particularly Elendil. The reason why the white tree starts shedding its petals is because they do that when something really bad is about to happen or happening. It's meant to be a really big omen. The reason why Sauron wanted to destabilize Numenor is because they were critical to defeating Morgoth's forces in the First Age. They weren't able to stop the Numenoreans, so Sauron is trying to make the smart move to neutralize them before he makes a larger play to conquer Middle-earth so that they can't oppose him. All their weapons and technology are far greater than anyone else except for like the Elves and the Dwarves. So it is that Sauron is trying to get Numenor to destroy itself slowly. Eärien finally has the smallest modicum of sense, takes a left turn and then warns her father Elendil, who tells Miriel that it's time to scoot for Middle-earth. He mentions his other son, Anarion, for those of you that were asking where he was this entire season. In the books, he becomes the king of Arnor, while Isildur eventually rules from Gondor. Briefly, though, because we know that he dies pretty soon after the War of the Last Alliance. The idea is that eventually Aragorn, when he comes along, descends from both of their lines and becomes the king of the reunified two different kingdoms after Return of the King. So for a while during the timeline, you have like two different factions of humans living in that area. Zoom in and enhance in the background, notice we see the sword lying next to her is Narsil, the same sword that Elendil had on his hip in his vision from the Palantir where he saw himself leaving the city, which we actually see come to pass at the end of this episode, leaving to go back to Middle-earth. When he calls it the White Flame, it was forged during the First Age by one of the greatest dwarven smiths of that age. In Quenya, one of the languages of the Elves, Narsil literally translates to red and white flame. Miriel stays on Numenor because we're not done with the Numenor plot yet. Like, there's still a lot of stuff that has to happen before the downfall of Numenor, which means that we will see it next season. Like, she isn't leaving the show or anything like that. Then we go back to Eregion. The orcs continue to lay siege to the city, but it's basically done for. This is also in the books too. It's called the Fall of Eregion. The orcs are meant to outnumber the elves greatly. They do explain that most of the elves that manage to escape mostly come to live in the newly created city of Rivendell, Elrond's new city. That's the place they wind up at the end of the episode. A place that is protected by the power of the Elven Rings, which Elrond winds up doing later when he gets one of the Rings of Power. Sauron continues to torture Celebrimbor, still looking for the 9 rings. When he mentions the orcs' bloodlust during battle, he talks about the fall of Gondolin. During the First Age, it was one of the greatest cities of the elves. The whole story from start to finish, how it was created and then what happened to it, is enough for an entire movie or multiple movies, but because it's from the Silmarillion, and I don't think that anyone has the film rights to those, we probably won't actually see that on screen ever. Generally, that's why you haven't seen any TV shows or movies based on the First Age, and why they had to be really careful with the way they portrayed that stuff during Season 1 of Rings of Power, just because they don't have the rights to the Silmarillion. Too bad, because most of the really epic stories in the Lord of the Rings universe that haven't been told yet are all from the Silmarillion. When he mentions the Kingfishers, saying that Sauron silenced them, those are special blue birds. And when he says he'll be out of his reach soon, going to the shores of the morning, he's talking about his immortal elven spirit going to the halls of Mandos after he dies. They can be reincarnated in a new body if they want. Elves can be reincarnated. Part of the idea is that elves, as immortal beings, spirits cannot be destroyed, so anytime they die, they go to the halls of Mandos, and they can basically get another body if they want. They don't have to, but they can. It's basically the same situation with the Ainur too, the Maiar and the Valar. They can get new bodies if they want because their spirits are immortal. That's how Sauron keeps coming back over and over and over. But the idea when elves do it is that the halls of Mandos are over in Valinor, so it's sort of like an MMO where you die somewhere else in the world and then res at the graveyard. Your spirit travels to the graveyard and reses there. So that's basically what's going to happen to Celebrimbor if he wants to come back. He'll just wake up in Valinor. When he says he'll be born there by a wind that Sauron can never follow, that's because of the ban of the Valar. Sauron literally cannot enter Valinor, or the Valar would throw him in prison, kind of like Morgoth, for the rest of time. The reason why this is such a big insult is because it's Celebrimbor telling Sauron that the rest of his kind, the Ainur, all hate him. He stands alone, while the rest of them live back in peace in Valinor. Basically saying that everybody hates you. Sauron then implies that he's knowledgeable enough in torture to keep him alive as long as he wants, to keep him in pain. You remember that he learned how to do that from Morgoth because Morgoth tortured him and pretty much every other being that served him. When Celebrimbor replies saying that his own craft will eventually betray him, he's talking about Frodo, Samwell being able to kill him when they, in Gollum, destroy the One Ring of Power. So the ring he forged, his greatest weapon, will wind up betraying him, metaphorically. That's also why he follows up by saying, "One alone shall prove your utter ruin," which is literally the end of Return of the King, how that goes down. Thank you for the assist, Gollum. So in the end, you really have to give Gollum credit for actually being the one to destroy him. He insults Sauron again, calling him a shadow of Morgoth. Sauron hates Morgoth. He basically calling him a wannabe poser copy of someone he despises, pissing him off enough to kill him. Then as he's dying, he says the name of the thing inside the thing, everybody pointing at the screen, does full meme, calling Sauron the Lord of the Rings. as they play a lament, sadder version of Sauron's theme, Where the Shadows Lie, as he sheds a tear. Not because he believes what Celebrimbor said, but because he's sad to lose him, because he really did enjoy working with Celebrimbor. Part of the idea is that he laments killing one of the greatest smiths to ever live. When the orc finds Sauron and he says his line about having many names that he said previously in the series, it's meant to be the beginning of him taking control of the orcs using the same tricks that he used to twist the elves around his finger. The orcs' minds are much easier for him to control though. Then we go back to Isildur and Theo, we haven't seen in a while, gives him a little pep talk about grief, and basically starts to set up the whole plot for the Numenoreans during Season 3. Estrid shows up, setting up more of the love triangle that will continue into Season 3. Then Kemen shows up to fortify the town as Pharazôn intends to use it as a bigger port, and because they're worried about Sauron and what's happening in Middle-earth, so they basically want to beef up the defensive fort of this city. Love Kemen's reaction to seeing Isildur. He could not be more pissed off, like, oh, you're still alive, oh crap. The whole basis for his weird situationship with Eärien was predicated on her hatred of Miriel, driven by the belief that she got Isildur killed. Learning that he's still alive is probably going to be the end of any chances that he had with her. So when we see her help her father at the end of the episode going against Pharazôn, seeing Isildur is alive will probably fully turn her back to the side of the faithful. But the whole situation here goes south fast after Estrid's fiance hears him talking about taking her to Numenor, then Kemen denying her passage because she's low-born, and tells him about the chaos of the season, with his father Elendil now wanted by the law and Miriel overthrown by Pharazôn. Basically, they want to set up the idea that he goes to Numenor, sees how crazy it is, and then goes with his father eventually back to Middle-earth, like he'll be back. Couple of the really important setups too. Kemen says that he's the new commander of the city, meaning that he's going to be in Middle-earth regularly now, making it way easier for Sauron to put a ring of power on his finger. So I think we all theorize that of the Numenoreans, he would be the one to actually get a ring of power. There could be other people from Numenor that get a ring of power, but at least Kemen. There's also the idea of the Black Numenoreans. They're meant to be the Numenoreans that were part of the King's Men, but survived the downfall because they were on Middle-earth. You have to imagine that being Kemen's group of Numenoreans. For example, the mouth of Sauron that we see during Return of the King, that's a Black Numenorean. Remember, he also tells them they need to start cutting down all the trees in the area for timber, exactly what the Ents did not want. So we're probably going to get some really pissed off Ents during Season 3. Then we see Galadriel surrendering herself to Adar, trying to bargain for the lives of the remaining elves in exchange for helping him try to kill Sauron, but finding that wearing her ring of power has healed him of all the damage that Morgoth did twisting his body while he was trying to create the orcs race. So now he looks like he did back during the years of the trees when the elves awoke. You have to remember that he was one of the original elves that woke, so he's just as old, if not older, than Círdan the Shipwright, who previously was thought of as the oldest elf living on the planet. He does say that he used to have a different name, and Adar was just the one he was given after he was twisted by Morgoth, but he can't remember what it was. You can let me know if you think you know what Adar's original name was. Basically, they set up the idea that he will make peace with the elves finally, like peace between orcs and elves. He will never wage war on Middle-earth or anywhere on the planet ever again. It sounds too good to be true, and of course it is because Adar is not from the original books. So we knew at some point Sauron was going to kill him because we knew he was going to get his crown back. And he basically uses the orcs to trick him, betraying Adar and killing him in the same way that Adar killed Sauron at the beginning of the season that we saw in the flashbacks. They even try to mirror the camera shots with the low shot of him looking up and Sauron looking down at him. So he's meant to die the same way that Sauron died. R.I.P. Adar, but I think we all knew that Sauron was going to eventually kill him at some point. Sauron then admits to Galadriel that he didn't always have everything planned out, like there was no actual master plan other than to try and conquer the world. The road goes ever winding, which is his way of saying that he improvised along the way, and the Rings of Power were part of that improvisation. He's meant to be a master at adaptation and a master of improvisation. They have a big battle with him trying to get her ring. He also winds up getting the 9 off of her, so that's how he starts putting it on people's hands during Season 3. We knew that was going to happen eventually somehow because the Nazgul would eventually be created. The reason why she can stand her ground for a little while here, why she lasts as long as she did, is because of the extra power her ring gives her. But even with her ring on, she's not nearly as powerful as Sauron, and he's just messing with her. Separately, Gil-galad sees his vision from the future come to pass when the orcs pull down the statue of Feanor holding the Silmaril. The reason why Elrond tries to stop the orcs from burning all of Celebrimbor's scrolls, as they're priceless, all this knowledge of the things that he created, is that one of his big roles in the Legendarium is a historian. He has a massive library full of important works from all ages, all across the world, in Rivendell, later in the timeline, so he basically starts collecting all this important knowledge and these important artifacts, like the shards of Narsil, eventually. Sauron then changes back to his Halbrand form to mess with Galadriel, reciting the same line from Season 1 when it seemed like they were about to kiss. Then he changes into her form and into Celebrimbor's form, reciting a bunch of old lines of dialogue to her, basically just trying to mess with her head. She's able to draw a little of his blood, and he stabs her with his crown, giving her another wound, kind of like the Nazgul give to Frodo. Giving her a wound that would theoretically never heal, but she does have her Ring of Power, and one of its powers is healing, so it essentially keeps her in this healed state as long as she's wearing the ring. Their whole fight also reminded me of their fight later in the timeline during the Hobbit movies when he's revealed as the Necromancer. That fight involved them both using a lot more magic, but basically the same idea. His line about her being worshipped as a queen is also meant to be a callback to her line during Fellowship of the Ring when she said the same thing to Frodo about what would happen if she were to wear the One Ring of Power. She'd become just as bad as Sauron. Great and terrible queen, all shall love me in despair. There are many moments in this episode and throughout this season where they borrow lines directly from the original movies. For example, when she mentions the free peoples of Middle-earth resisting him, that's based on another line of hers from the prologue in Fellowship of the Ring. He then takes the 9 rings from her, gotta put those on some hands in Season 3, so we're on Nazgul watch heading into the next couple of years. We finally see the dwarves show up to Eregion just in time to save Elrond and the others, but Durin isn't there because he's mourning the death of his father, R.I.P. This is meant to be Narvi in the armor telling him what's going on. Then Galadriel tricks Sauron the same way that Elrond tricked Gil-galad at the beginning of the season, jumping off the cliff with the ring to prevent him from getting it. This time, though, there's no water to ease her fall, but the healing power of the elven rings help her heal. Otherwise, pretty much every other bone in her body would have been crushed. Like I said, when Gil-galad says that her wounds are drawing her immortal spirit into the unseen world, it's meant to be just like Frodo's wound given to him by the Nazgul, drawing him into the unseen world until the elves started to heal him. But the wound itself, because Frodo didn't wear the ring all the time, did not fully heal ever. Galadriel, on the other hand, wears her Ring of Power most of the time, so the ring keeps her in this healed state. Elrond finally relents in his hatred of the rings, using them to help heal her too. Remember, eventually he'll wear Vilya, the blue ring of air, which Gil-galad will give him. That's the one that Gil-galad is wearing right now, but Elrond uses her ring to do this. Then we get Poppy's speech about some things being lost forever, also based on Galadriel's speech during the prologue from Fellowship about Isildur losing the One Ring of Power, then the races of Middle-earth eventually forgetting about the wars in the Second Age and the threat of Sauron over the centuries. Like, part of the problem with a lot of the races that are not immortal is that they forget things very quickly compared to elves who have perfect memory. As Isildur sails back to Numenor, Miriel is arrested and thrown in prison. Elendil does what he saw himself doing in his vision from the Palantir, riding away from the city. It sounds like at some point at the beginning of Season 3, he'll head back to Middle-earth. I'm guessing Isildur will show up at some point at the beginning of Season 3, see his sister, see his father, and then they'll come back to Middle-earth together. Don't know what's going to happen to his sister, though. She might wind up staying on Numenor. When Poppy references building something new, you see Sauron taking Feanor's hammer, and this is meant to be him thinking about crafting the One Ring of Power, confirming now, at least in the show, that he used Feanor's hammer to do it. You have to remember that both Feanor and Sauron were apprenticed to Aule the Smith, the Valar, so at least for Sauron, this is meant to be symbolic. Merrimack and the other halflings call Gandalf Grand Elf a couple times in a row very quickly, foreshadowing his actual name. The actual Gandalf name is based on Norse in real life. It translates to Wand Elf. It's the very first name J.R.R. Tolkien ever created in the Lord of the Rings universe when he started writing. Like, very first character, very first name. So at least for right now, it seems like Gandalf and Nori in the halflings go their separate ways, with the surviving halflings heading back west to eventually create the Shire. In the books, the Shire itself isn't created till much later in the timeline, but because they're changing so much on the show, we'll probably see them create the Shire by like the final season. Then he winds up finding his staff lying on the ground. Notice before he finds it, you hear this giant gust of wind before he sees it. They're implying that Tom Bombadil probably helped with that. Like, give a little push, check this out on the ground. All as a way to reward him for choosing the right path, choosing to help people instead of choosing power. His staff is meant to resemble the staff you see him wielding during Fellowship of the Ring. He gets a newer staff when he comes back as Gandalf the White, though. Then he goes back to Tom Bombadil's and says his name, Gandalf, that's what they're going to call me. And the idea is that the different races all have different names for him. Like the Valar call him Olrin, the Elves call him Mithrandir, the Dwarves call him Tharkun. He's had many other aliases in his travels all over the world. When Tom Bombadil says, "Let the song begin," and they begin singing together, that's a reference to a couple songs, the songs he himself sings all the time in the books, like Tom Bombadil is known for all of his songs. But also the idea of the song that the Ainur sing with Iluvitar, like it's Iluvitar's song, and all the Ainur, the Valar, the Maiar, sing with him. They sung creation into existence, essentially. The actual song that they're singing in the episode, though, Tom Bombadil is a Merry Fellow, is one of the songs that Tom Bombadil sings in the books. All the songs that he sung earlier in the episodes were also from the books. Then they transition back to the Dark Wizard's fortress as he watches the stars, basically sensing what has transpired with both Gandalf and Sauron back in Eregion, like he's just kind of ruminating on what's happened. Then back in Khazad-dûm, when Durin says he's going to be ready to help Elrond and the Elves again, that's meant to foreshadow the War of the Last Alliance and the wars between the Elves and Sauron, which happened before the War of the Last Alliance. Like there's a lot of war that happens before the Last Alliance. We find out that the other 6 dwarven lords want their money back that they paid to his father as tithe, and not all the dwarven lords support him as his father's chosen heir. The idea is that some are trying to make their own claim for the throne, including his brother, who sounds like he's not on great terms with Durin. So it's kind of a Game of Thrones, Stannis Renly situation, like War of the Five Kings situation. They also end their storyline this season on the Dwarven Ring of Power, just to remind you that theoretically whoever would become king, if it's not Durin, would probably put the ring back on, and we'd have the exact same problem that we had this season with Durin III. But even though it seems like Durin IV has all these problems he has to deal with, and he's still not even technically king yet, the books have been out there for a long time, so we know eventually what does happen to Durin's line. Galadriel then wakes up in what will become Rivendell. I think they're trying to echo Frodo waking up in Fellowship of the Ring after he's wounded and then saved by the elves in Rivendell. When he says it's a sanctuary protected by the Elven Rings, the idea is that over the centuries, Elrond protected Rivendell with the power of his eventual Elven Ring, which is why the orcs were never able to invade it. Literally, it becomes impenetrable to them. Then they basically hold a vote of the surviving elves of whether to go on the offensive and fight Sauron's forces or fall back and build their defenses, and they all decide to make war. So the scene is meant to set up the War of Elves and Sauron from the books for Season 3 going forward. If you haven't read the books, those were the first wars fought against Sauron. My assumption right now, based on the way things are going, is that Season 3 will release in 2026, but I don't think they have officially, or at least announced that they've renewed it. But the way that everybody talked about, like the showrunners talked about, the actors talked about, it sounds like they have already renewed it behind the scenes. The other big reminder is that later this year, they're also releasing the War of the Rohirrim movie, which is a completely separate part of the timeline and a completely separate group of people making it. Like, it's not the same people that are making the show. So there's a lot more Lord of the Rings related content coming out later this year. There's so much going on in the episode. If there's any big Easter eggs or references that you spotted that I didn't talk about in the video or my previous videos, just write them below in the comments. Everybody click here for all my Deadpool and Wolverine deleted scenes, bonus features, alternate endings, alternate jokes, and click here for all my Rings of Power episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.